Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I'm back from the trade shows and I'm home for a while. I can't thank the great people at OR enough. They are always so nice, and this year they hooked me up with a hotel room. That was so convenient and cool of them. And because of that, I'm not going to talk about the show other than saying that they need to move the dates. But I don't make those calls. I make podcasts. And on the Thursday of the trade show, I had former pro snowboarder and legendary Denver-based artist Pat Milbery lined up. And I have to be totally honest with you. I broke my dry January when I interviewed Dave Amaral at the WSM show by having 2 beers with him. And then I did it all over again before I interviewed Pat. And when I say I did it all over again, I broke every rule of dry January and then some. Pretty much, I went to the show all day, and then I left at around 2:30 to take a hot tub. Once I was good and dehydrated, I headed back to the show for beer time. I had about 4 beers at the show, and I was feeling a buzz. At about 6, it was time for me to step outside, have a few breaths of fresh air, and then I was off to the store to buy a couple more beers to bring them to the hotel for Pat and I to drink during our podcast. By the time Pat and I started interviewing, I had had enough to drink, but my dumbass kept going. And the combination of not drinking for a month, times being at altitude, without drinking much water, and not eating since noon, and whatever else was going on, really caught up with me. And I'm super embarrassed to say that an hour into the podcast, I was worthless, and Pat wasn't impressed with me. While we laid down most of the podcast, it was decided that it would be best if some of the podcast was done remotely. Now, I could have totally re-recorded this one, but that's not authentic or my style. Instead, I felt like a total idiot, but at the same time, it was a good lesson for me. Drink responsibly when doing a podcast, or don't drink at all. And I can't apologize to Pat enough, but at the same time, I think the podcast came out great, although I cringe whenever I speak. So Pat Milbery, I'm so sorry, and I'm glad that you're such a nice and cool person that you weren't angry with me. You were more concerned about my well-being. Before we get into the podcast, I want to ask you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement and on Twitter at Powell Movement 1. Please share and retweet my stuff as it really does help the show grow more than you can imagine. Finally, I need to thank my sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Stanley, Alpine Vans, Elon Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, it's time to talk with Pat Milbery. So I've been doing it dry January, but that has totally changed, and I've been drinking for the past 3 hours, but I'm sitting here with Pat Milbery. And Pat, you have always been a dude who is a super nice, humble guy who's always been about the youth and making sure the youth is in a good place. Tell us what your day was today, because it sounds like you were doing something for the youth of Colorado.
Today, I was very gratefully given the opportunity by a friend to go and visit a local school. And they are working on a t-shirt design to do some fundraising at an inner city school that is right next to the Curtis Park neighborhood and the Five Points neighborhood, where we have a lot of art and culture here that's very rich in the history of culture in Denver. And the school is trying to raise some money for the kids and services and just overall supplies for the students. And I was asked to go in and speak with about 230 kids today about art, about their future, about what they can become, and also about how to design and create a t-shirt.
Do you get nervous when you stand in front of 250 kids and they're looking at you? And how do you do standing in front of crowds talking on a microphone?
It makes me so happy. I feel very relaxed. I take a deep breath. And before I go into any public speaking or a situation in this sort of realm, I take some deep breaths. I really think about how grateful I am for this opportunity and what type of experiences and wisdom and love and opportunity that I can share with them as far as encouragement. And I try to encourage them through a lot of the encouragement that I've been given through life. And I don't know, I kind of look up at the sky, I smile, and I just kind of roll with like what comes naturally to me.
All right. Well, when people describe you, it's always like the kindest, the sweetest, the nicest human being. And you can hear that in just our first few sentences. And while you were able to inspire a lot of Colorado kids today, life doesn't start for you in Colorado. You're a Midwest kid, Mendota Heights, Minnesota, and that's like one of the best places to live in the whole Twin Cities. What did the folks do?
Well, I really studied my father, and I really admire my father still to this day. He just turned 75, and he's one of the nicest, most kind, giving, sharing, loving human beings. So I grew up in St. Paul, and then we moved over to Mendota Heights. My father built a house.
Like built it himself?
Him and a few buddies built a house, yeah.
Like, we're going to, hey, on weekends, we're going to work together. We're going to build this fucking house. It's going to be great.
He sure did. And he even built a cobblestone driveway from a bunch of original, beautiful, multi-ton, heavy as hell stone from the historic streets of St. Paul that were being ripped out. And he brought them over and they laid a stone driveway.
Like out of reclaimed St. Paul shit from the 1920s?
Absolutely. Just beautiful, beautiful stone. And he did all the woodworking in there and the stain work. So I grew up around a lot of carpentry and
thoughtful art.
Very thoughtful, very classy, kind of timeless. My mom and my father were, and my mom's up in heaven now, but they raised me to be respectful. They raised me to be appreciative. They raised me to work hard and put a lot of effort and be respectful of people, you know? And I really tried to do my best to respect that, but also value that. And man, I feel very lucky where I was raised, you know, and with the folks I was raised with. Yeah, we had a yard, not a huge yard, but enough of a yard with a little slope and a pond actually in the backyard. So
you playing pond hockey and pouring water out there, freezing it in the winter, and you're able to play because you grew up playing team sports, right? Like
that's
you were playing hockey and baseball. And while you are a humble person that doesn't want to answer questions like this, growing up, you had this athletic ability that made you almost the best person on every team that you were on. You just had that skill. Is that correct?
Yeah, man. I think I got it from my pops. I mean, my mom was pretty athletic too. They loved the outdoors. They taught me a lot about the value of being outside and just being in nature. And at a young age, my sister and I were outside all the time. My father, he was a big hockey player.
How far did he go?
He played college hockey for the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
So that's like as big as you can in the state of Minnesota if you don't go pro.
That's the team. If you're going to play for somewhere in Minnesota, the Gophers and the University of Minnesota is like the team. And growing up, he was very encouraging me in athletics and sports. I still am a big sports and like team. I value it a lot. But at the age of 11, I didn't. And I got turned off from it. And that's where my mom was super supportive of my decision, and that's where counterculture and what I'm going to say used to be an alternative lifestyle. I chose that alternative lifestyle. And I grew up playing pond hockey with my dad and with all these kids in the neighborhood. My shins were hacked to shit for years, you know, but it taught you how to play. It taught you how to be respectful of others, but also taught you a lot about work ethic. And meanwhile, when we moved from St. Paul over to Mendota Heights, which is crazy, is only like a 7-minute move.
Everybody's well off in those places, right?
For the most part, my dad just got really lucky. I mean, from a visionary perspective, like they wanted to build a house and have a space for my sister and I and our family to share with each other, but also share with like our friends, our family, our extended family. And my mom comes from a big family. She had 10 brothers and sisters.
There's always like a party of people at her house, and she likes that, like a lot of community and a lot of people just talking and bonding.
Energy. Yeah. Loves it. Bring the energy, you know, just have energy around. And she always was very supportive as far as like entertaining and wanting people to enjoy our space.
The hostess with the mostest.
Absolutely. You know, she had her quesadilla bar on lock. That was like our favorite thing to do after school with my friends and my sister's friends. You know, we'd come over and make food together and all that.
Hot chocolate out the window when you're snowboarding kind of thing.
You know what? That was delivery, yes. Keep the headphones on, walk to the window. Yo, Mom, what's up? No. So grateful for that, yeah. It was special on a lot of levels. You know, we made the most of the space that we could, but it was so DIY. And that's where when I decided to make that switch, when politics kind of got in the way and allowed my mind to see, damn, like this is what the world is. It's cold and there's a bunch of egos and favoritism that are going to play into life. And I remember being 11 years old and knowing I was better than like a few kids on this team, but I basically made the team as like an alternate. And I said, fuck, I'm not sitting on the bench. Fuck that. You know, like I'm not going to waste my time when I know what is going to happen here. And it's not that I wasn't a team player. It's just one of those things that I just knew I didn't want to involve myself with. So that was around the time one of my friends was super big into skateboarding and snowboarding, lived up the street. And we'd always watch like all the original Trans World films and 4-in-1 Video Magazine and all that together. And he had subscriptions to like Thrasher and Trans World Snow and Snowboarder. And it was one of those moments where watching style, seeing the style, being exposed to a culture that I wasn't super familiar with, and just absolutely falling in love with the thought of what this could become.
You say that you kind of got into skateboarding, but you got into being a rollerblader, and I'm going to guess it's around 95, 96-ish. I don't know exactly what years you get into it, probably even before that. But how did the whole rollerblading thing start for you? Did you move from playing hockey to like street hockey to jumping off curbs?
Wild how that happened. Still, when I think back to it, I don't really know how it happened. I think what happened was I enjoyed hockey, but I got introduced to it. I was skateboarding with my neighbor Peter a lot. I love still skate. And I had a friend, I think, that was super into rollerblading, and he was like, dude, like, you got to try this, whatever. And Rollerblade was a company based out of Minnesota. So their headquarters were 25 minutes from the house or whatnot. And it was one of those things like, well, it seemed pretty natural from hockey to go into that, like summer, winter, whatever. And so I just like, oh, I'll give it a try, and did. And it was super fun.
It seems like you got into it through hockey, and then you started jumping off stuff and grinding stuff, and you're the creative dude throughout any sport you ever do. It was an interesting time, though, where you're competing, and rollerblading was like what defined you as a 14 to 17-year-old? That was like your thing?
Yeah, it was just wild. It was like something that I just started doing and then like kept doing. It just brought a lot of joy and passion. And then I felt really natural at it. And then I guess I progressed super fast. And whenever I want to learn something, I'm pretty disciplined in the sense of how I take the time and effort to put into like learning the mechanics and whatnot. And I had a couple friends that I was going to school with at the time. And I just remember them like being super hyped on it, and then always be like, dude, come with us, come with us, So I'd go out with them a lot, and they were really, really, really good. I guess we just pushed each other, and progressed in that sense. And it evolved crazy fast. And when I think back to that, I haven't thought about that for a while. I actually haven't put skates on for...
What, 25 years?
Probably 22 years.
Yeah, totally.
Which is wild to think about. I think back to that time and just like how everything evolved so quickly. And next thing you know, I was getting opportunities, getting offers to do all this stuff. And it wasn't something that I was like, oh my God, I got to do this. It wasn't something like that was what I dreamt of. It was just, I enjoyed it. And then things just started happening. And that's kind of been this odd metaphor and kind of synchronicity of my life, I would imagine, as the universe has just done these like very like odd, like magical things throughout my existence. I have a hard time explaining a lot of the times. And next thing you know, like some of the like quote unquote gods of that industry were like hanging out in my basement of my house and were supporting me and like, like encouraging me to travel wherever I wanted to go. It was just bizarre when I think back to that, how it all happened. But, it's kind of one of those things like you just ride the waves, right? And everything was positive and it was fun and it was encouraging and it was healthy. And I was just like riding those positive waves at the time and having fun and doing some pretty wild stuff, and I think at that time I needed that because when I was 12, like I had a cousin who was 13 and had a really, really, really gnarly situation evolve with an unexpectedness, but he took his life and he also like took my aunt's life and his two little brothers.
Oh my God. That's fucking crazy.
My
right?
cousin was 13 years old and
he's like a Dateline special.
It was like one of the first ever like homicide situations that was publicized on television.
Was he Milbery last name?
No, it was not the same last name. It was my mom's sister, but it was my cousin Alec, and rest in paradise, because he was one of the smartest, most genius people and human beings I've ever encountered. And he, in a lot of respects, I think was just so overly smart, too smart for his own good, and had a hard time communicating that. And my uncle pulled into their garage and opened up the front door and heard a gunshot and immediately panicked, got in his car, like ripped to the neighbor's house. This was before cell phones existed, and called 911. And When the police arrived at the house, they found my cousin dead in his room with suicide notes scattered throughout the entire room. And then my aunt and uncle's room, he had written close to 50 to 100 apology letters. And my aunt and my two little cousins were shot in the back of the head.
Dude, this fucking batshit crazy, Pat.
It was wild, man. I was 12 years old and trying to absorb this situation. And so I remember my mom getting the phone call, and it was like probably one of the hardest moments. I've never seen my mom this sad. I never seen my mom panic like this. I never seen my mom as scared as she was when my sister and I were watching television, and I remember her just like panicking, ghostly. I remember going to give her a hug. I have no idea what happened. You could feel the goosebumps. Like I was in complete shock at that moment of time. And it was a very, very tough moment. The news spread like crazy. It was all over, obviously, the news, and I didn't show up for school for a few days, just trying to absorb this and take it in. So the year before was like my awakening to team sports and kind of politics.
So you're pissed off at that, at life in that respect.
It was consciousness. I became conscious of a lot at a young age, and it made me so aware, but also grateful, but also very, very thankful for what I had, you know, and it made me thankful for being able to have people around me that cared, that loved me, that were able to allow me to be open and supported me for just who I was. It also forced me to have outlets that were not only productive and positive, but that were like pushing me to channel this energy out. Because I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have those outlets.
So rollerblading and snowboarding was like your creative outlet where you didn't have to think about Pat at all. You could turn your brain off because you had some serious shit to think about.
Well, at the time, I was obsessed. I absolutely loved Natas Kappas on a skateboard in a human being, like his style, him and Gons. Those dudes, like their styles were something that I just admire still to this day. You know, like those dudes. Tom Penny was like a huge influence on me at that time. Ingmar Bachmann, Jamie Lynn, Daniel Frank was like one of my heroes, like that dude's style. Like I'm in this, right? And then I start discovering who like Arlo Eisenberg was. But skateboarding, like that style and like the evolution of what I really fell in love with, like watching and like trying to understand was like watching Nada skate.
So it starts with skateboarding, you find rollerblading, and then snowboarding eventually becomes like your passion.
I loved snowboarding the most out of anything. And so snowboarding has always been like my first love, but I just kept doing everything. Like I would skateboard with my friend Peter all the time and a few other homies. Then I would rollerblade with some of my other friends.
That sport, you ended up being pro and being paid and getting money to travel. You were on Senate.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Dave Mirra was on Senate.
Yeah.
Rooftop Escamilla was on Senate. You were on Senate, given you were lost in a sea of amateurs, but like you were on a brand that was shaking the world up. So you're the nicest person in the world, and your brand says, kill all girls on the tag. What did you think at that time? Because that was the biggest thing in marketing.
Yeah. Genius. Arlo Eisenberg and everyone behind that brand is absolutely genius, if you ask me. When all that went down, it was just wild because like dudes like John Julio were like, to me, were playing Tribe Called Quest and all these like independent hip hop acts and like really dope like soundtracks that Dave Payne was producing Video Groove magazine. And Dave is an incredible human being. I mean, he's like a brother to me. So Dave really brought me into like the music cultures. But what I think was so interesting is that like at that time, if you did something different that was alternative, I mean, you were kind of frowned upon, which was cool. Like, yeah. I actually loved that, you know, about that era, the beauty of individuality and something being alternative, truly being alternative. Like when punk rock, which I listen to still to this day, but in my headphones, would push me to learn and progress on the streets or on the slopes.
Just giving you the juice to like fucking do something and not think about it, just like music took your brain over.
Fuck yeah, dude. You know, the punk rock scene in Minneapolis was ridiculous.
Like First Ave, you saw a lot of bands there?
Absolutely, you know, saw Prince there. Talk about individuality. Prince was like Mr. Individuality, you know, and we had a really strong culture of that, and a lot of punk rock was coming through there, you know, from Warped Tours to a lot of the independent venues to all the music stores, whatever else. There's always been this unity and this community of the mix and support of music and alternative lifestyles and whatnot. But thinking back to that time, it was wild because a lot of us, like, we go skate with skateboarders. There wasn't this beef. I mean, it was there here and there, but it was more like hey, like, if you're doing what you're doing and we're doing what we're doing, cool. Like, you got good spots. Like, let's just go session.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start out with the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. Not only do they make the Northwest's best beers, but if you haven't tried their clean line seltzers or cocktails in a can, well, you're missing out. And you can try just about everything at their Denver, Portland, Boise, and Bend-based pubs. Really, 10 Barrel specializes in everything that I think is fun: skiing, snowboarding, biking, and drinking beer outside. And from supporting a world-class team of athletes that includes Lucas Walks, Ejak, Curtis Cizek, Kate Zeleth, Carson Storch, and Ben Ferguson, they also create countless events and host their own, like their epic Pray for Snow parties. On top of that, they give back to causes like Protect Our Winters. They have supported this podcast for years, and to celebrate that, next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel and drink it outside. For more on everything 10 Barrel, head on over to 10barrel.com. Next up is Elon Skis, and I've told you before how much fun I'm having on my Ripstick 96 Black Edition. And for the past decade, I've skied a wider ski because that's what I thought people did in the Northwest. And I've had a blast on my Ripstick 106. But when it's hard and fast out there, the 96 is so much more fun. That carving sensation, well, I feel it a whole lot more, and I'm hooked on the more narrow-waisted ski. And being that these skis are made in Elon's best-in-class factory in Slovenia, the quality of my skis is visibly better than anything else on the wall. Next time you're at a place that you can demo some skis, try something out of the Ripstick line and you will be sold on Elon just like I am. They are so good and they're always good times. To find out more about the skis, message me or check out elonskis.com. My final sponsor this round is Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Peter Glenn has been getting people out there for over 60 years, and whether you're going on vacation or a weekend warrior or ski or ride every day, Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the deals, a knowledgeable staff, a price matching policy, and free shipping on orders of $49 or more. If you're listening to this podcast and need gear, please do me a favor and head on over to peterglenn.com. They have all the deals, and by buying from them, you are supporting the show and keeping it going. So please check out peterglenn.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. In your regular life, you had friends in high school that became some of the biggest talent to come out of the Midwest. Like, there was a couple different hip-hop groups in that area that you probably even helped in that world. Give them to Dave Payne and like, hey, put them in a movie. And you helped their careers and you had long-term friendships with these dudes, right?
Yeah. I think aesthetic has always been really important to me, right? So for me, when I look at a landscape, when I look at a space, when I look at something aesthetically, there's something that from photography, I've always loved a lot of, I guess you can say, classic cliche photographers like Ansel Adams. But I got super into photography in high school and took some courses in college as well. And aesthetically, that's what I really appreciated, looking at the pages of the magazine, seeing the photos of what was published and you know, style-wise and all that. That was always something that was really important to me. And then also, like, in regards to the people around me, like, there's a lot of influences that worked really hard that were incredibly successful. And I've always thought about the concept of, like, if we can bring each other up, we're raising, like, the overall net worth of us all, right? So, like, if you can help bring someone up and you can help introduce them to the world and allow them to blossom, like, you're doing something great for another human being, which also can benefit so many other people, because let's expose our friends that are incredibly hungry, passionate, and really deserve that kind of credit to others. And so, yeah, I knew a little bit about indie hip hop and underground hip hop, but I mean, I'm a Minnesota kid growing up in St. Paul, right? So I remember being 14 years old. I always had my Walkman or Discman or whatever I had at the time. I remember walking into Spanish class and meeting this girl who would always ask me what I'm listening to. You know, we sat next to each other and she'd be like, "What are you listening to?" And I'd be like, Cypress Hill or Snoop. Or that was right when I started discovering Tribe Called Quest, which...
That changed your life?
Q-Tip is like one of my favorite like producers and MCs of all time.
Well, like 94, 95 is when you're really getting into that kind of shit?
The Far Side, yeah, Tribe Called Quest, like Pennywise, Outkast, Offspring, like Lagwagon, you know. Nirvana was like massive at the time. But at that point, I had my headphones on. She'd always ask me what I was listening to. She'd be like, "Why do you listen to all that West Coast? Why don't you listen to the locals?" And I was like, "I don't know locals. Like, who are locals?" She's like, "Listen to this hip hop." Well, she was dating at the time this dude. His name is Mikey, Little Mikey, they called him. And that was his MC name. He went on to be Idea
Okay.
And then form ID and abilities.
Right.
And so she was like, why don't you listen to the locals? Why don't you support the locals? And she was dating him, and she knew more than me, and she was looking out for her man. And so she hustled me on a tape, and I bought it, and I started listening to Mikey and his freestyles, and then we ended up meeting, and we actually became friends. The universe just aligned it once again in the sense of like, how does this stuff happen? You got to be open to it, but you also have to allow it to happen. You got to be there for other people, you know? So many people have been there for me in my life that I am incredibly grateful for, from going through such hard times at a young age, losing close family members, to my mom passing away 16 years ago, to Mikey Idea passing away, my good friend Josh Millay. I've had a lot of really close people around me in my life move on to the next chapter, you know?
How do you bounce back from that? Because like you said, your mom, like you and your mom designed a pro snowboard model together.
With my boy Leif, yes. That model was with a company that my buddy Ron Beretta started in Breckenridge, Colorado called Sin Snowboards.
Fucking amazing. And your mom passes. You're talking about all the other people that passed. But how do you bounce back from like all those people dying and you have to deal with it? Because Josh Millay was like a best friend of yours.
Very
it seemed
close.
like, you know, like he made the Seth Pistol ski. And when he died, all the ski patrollers that pulled up to him had that ski graphic pull up in front of him. Another thing that you're talking about with the symmetry of the world and how it all works together. But for you, you've had to deal with some tragedy, and we'll just get rid of it here, and then we'll go to other parts of your life. But between Josh, your mom, all the shit that happens, how do you bounce back from that stuff, being a kind, super happy, positive person?
Well, you know, what I think you have to be aware of in life is that every day you wake up, I try to say to myself, and I try to either write down or I go through my head everything I'm grateful for. And then I get out of bed and I charge that day. And there might not be a lot of things that are happening. I might have a sore back. I might have a sore arm from painting. I might have sore knees from jumping off a gap and landing flat on something that, you know, I did 15 years ago or 5 years ago or a couple days ago. I think what I like to do is look at why we're here and know that death is natural, right? It's just a phase. And
your mom and Josh die within a year. Do you not want to snowboard as much? Do you not want to paint as much? Do you sit inside and are you sad? Like, how do you react to that? Because that's like the hardest shit you can do in life, right?
I cried, man. Yeah. I cried a lot. I hit some incredible emotional walls of trying to understand why this was happening, but also how to breathe my way through it.
But your mom had cancer and you knew about it.
Yeah.
So you know she's might not going to make it. With someone like Josh and people that die in the mountains, that's like you get a phone call and like that part of your life is dead.
Yeah. Right? Death is tough. You know, it's a huge challenge. I wake up every day. I wish I could call my mom and hear her voice. But instead, I look up at the sky and I talk to her through how I can channel that energy that I know she's there, right? And spiritually, she always had angels around our house. And I still, to this day, feel like there's people and women. I'm very aware of people around me, and I look around me, I feel around me the energy of like women that are truly like everyday living angels that find me in life. And the reason why I say that is that when my mom was super sick, in hospice, in our basically living room of our house.
So you had to live that 24 hours a day when you weren't at school, be around something that was very scary.
And I chose to, because when you face the hardest things in life, you're not only aware of what can and could happen, but you're also accepting the truth. And you're also accepting reality in the sense of you're not running from something, right? And I remember, I don't want to play it into like the Far Side, but like you can't keep running away, right? Like running that track that the Far Side produced in like 93 from the Bizarre Ride 2 or something like that. I think that album it came off of, you know, it was one of those things that like, if you don't face reality and you keep running from it, it's going to catch up sometime. It's going to find you. And I knew if I wasn't there digesting this and trying to understand this and just being there for my mom, because when someone brings you into the world, you think about how much effort and time. I mean, the whole element of like pregnancy and women, and like it's now treated as something that's just like common and natural, but man, that takes so much courage for a woman to bring a person into the world.
It takes courage for everyone involved, Pat.
Everyone.
For everyone mentally. You're bringing a person into the world, but yeah, the woman has to face all the physical parts of it, unfortunately.
And then nurturing, though, right? So when I was born, I had a collapsed lung.
Whoa.
My mom did not get to hold me for almost 30 days. I was in intensive care in an incubator for close to 30 days, dude. I was born premature, super light. So I've always had really sensitive lungs.
Is that why you like edibles?
That's why I'm forced to. Yeah, that explains a lot, right? No, yeah. But I think that's what also taught me a lot about this bond with my mom, because I wasn't able to be held and cradled like a normal child baby, was, right? So when my mom was really sick, I sat there and did the best I could. And yeah, it was emotional. It was hard. That's when I started becoming aware and also a believer in spirituality. And that's when I really started reading a lot of books, allowing me to feel and understand like Buddhism and really understand a different perspective about how spirituality could play a role in our lives. How about this? When you face death, you face one of the hardest moments that you'll ever face in your life. So it wakes you up to how real life is, what's important, but also never taking anything for granted and being super, super appreciative of what you have.
We're done talking about people that you know dying, because it sucks that your mom died. It sucks that your friend died. And it sucks when anybody dies. But shit happens. And eventually you stop rollerblading, go into college. And it seems like in college you live with 4 dudes that are into graffiti. And is that when kind of art starts for you? And you're focusing on snowboarding and art, and that's about it?
As far as the transition goes, I didn't want to go to school. A lot of my friends moved out west.
But it was the next natural progression. Your parents wanted you to go. You followed in their footsteps of what they wanted to do, and you went.
No, more like I think there's a large value in education and higher learning. They really were hoping I would go to school for sure. But during high school, I wasn't around school that much. I did well, but I was gone a lot from school to the point where I barely got through my junior year because I was traveling so much.
For skating.
Yeah. And then during the winter, I'd go out and like stay with my friends that moved out to Colorado and Breckenridge. And like Josh moved out. He like dropped out of high school and he was out in Vail or whatever. So I remember going out and like staying with him when I was 17 or 18.
So you knew when you wanted to be in Colorado when you were really young. Like skating was one thing that was fun, but snowboarding was more important. And when you started going to Colorado, you realized that's where you're going to be.
I hope to be there, yeah, absolutely, because Snowmass was the first mountain my dad took us to. My dad and my mother got engaged in Aspen, and I remember when I was 14, this was the first mountain that I ever experienced in my life. It just changed my reality. And now I'm sitting here close to almost 30 years later. So yeah, it was one of those transitions that I went to school because I cannot thank my parents enough for encouraging me. I mean, college was actually super affordable at that time, and it was a state school. But also, I wasn't around my family a lot as a teenager. I was traveling a ton. So it was a good time to be kind of anchor back with the family a little bit. And then, close after that is when my mom got diagnosed with cancer. So yeah, higher education, I think there's a huge value in it if it feels right and something that you believe in. And it introduced me to a lot of people, both like jocks to like a bunch of hot girls to dudes that were playing on the tennis team that used to take the van. Oh man, there's some wild stories from college. But then I ended up like living with a few really close friends.
They're like art guys.
Well, they were more like a lot of drawing and like sketching, just very creative, right? We had turntables at our house and we had our freestyle cypher sessions. It was a super fun house of people that I was able to live with. But it was an amazing like creative outlet and a lot of fun for sure.
So you finished college and you head out west. It was like you were destined to do that from when you were 14.
Well, I built snowboard parks in our backyard throughout that whole time, which was amazing. We had different stair sets and these train tracks. So you'd see freights come through our backyard all the time. And all the graph and all the art on those trains like really inspired me.
So you were watching trains go by with graffiti
within
on them?
Like 20 feet of the house I was living in. And there was a huge scene of friends that used to skate, from skateboarders to inline skaters to snowboarders to all that got into graffiti. And I really admired their work ethic and also what they did to get where they got, and it was something that I always appreciated and I still do appreciate. And obviously like the essence and the cryptic nature of what it is to get up and to not only leave your name but make your mark. But there was this bridge in the back of our house It was super flat area, but I filled in all the stairs and put plywood down this bridge. That it was a pedestrian bridge. And I'd use the stairs. They were like 6 to 8 feet wide. And I'd put plywood down the stairs and create like a drop in. And I went to this park that was on the other side of that bridge and took apart like soccer goals and whatever else. And we would just session all these like flat bar rails and build all these. I built like a snowboard park in the setup. So my roommates would be DJing like in the room, open up the window.
So it's like backyard setup and your house is a party.
Yeah, that was wild, man. In college, it was a super fun time because we were going to school and I was learning a lot as far as discipline. I'd like kind of partied a little bit in high school. I didn't party that much, but in college is when I actually tried partying more and experienced that whole thing.
So you live with a bunch of art guys who are more like drawing stuff and whatever, and you learn some stuff from them. I thought you learned how to spray paint stuff, and that would be where you grew in that area, but whatever.
I did.
Did you have a name that you spray painted that signified that you were there? Did you have a tag?
I had a few, yeah.
What was your name back then?
Like I went through a few different phases. When I first learned how to screen print and I was like cutting stencils and I was learning that whole thing, It was Pure, Pure. It was like this P with this kind of abstract like star that was a part of the lettering. And then, I had a speedball screen printing kit that I just started making shirts. I'd go to Walgreens or wherever I could find blank t-shirts and I was just doing like one color screens, And I was super into like collage art. So when I was younger, I drew a lot. I got into watercolor a lot. And then my mom and my aunt and a few others like were super into like stenciling and kind of these like finishes that they would do around the house, whatever. So I started watching them, how they would like paint in stencils and whatever else. I'd go through like all these magazines back in the day, like Maxim and all these like female mags with like beautiful women to like snow mags to culture mags like Rolling Stone magazine and all that. And I would cut out all these images and make these abstract collages and then spray paint. My dad had Rust-Oleum and Krylon around the house, so I just figured out, all right, cool, I'm going to like layer like stencils in with collaging, and I just would geek out. Like I would spend hours and just listen to music and just make collages, and I love doing that. I love screen printing. And I really got into screen printing out at Wendell's when I was coaching at Wendell's out at Mount Hood. And Pat Abramson, everyone knows him as Pat A, was the head coach at the time. That was like right when my mom passed. And I give Pat so much credit because that dude had my back. I hung out with him almost every single day while we were there. And we screen printed together. We created all this stuff together. And that's when I started a little project called Sonar.
That's like an umbrella of everything you do. Like your art, you had a summer camp that went for like 6-7 years.
Well, it was winter actually. So it started at Hood, right? And sonar is a metaphor. It was like it's always been a common expression. Like that's so gnarly, right? Like that's gnarly. That's so gnarly. So it started out like my life at that moment. It felt like this weird reality. It was like I would have never imagined I would be living the way I was living.
Are people flowing you product and you're part of brands when you start Sonar?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was already some momentum and established like momentum that was happening.
So you go from college to moving to Colorado, and then Sonar starts probably 3 years later.
2005 is when that started.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and I'm going to start out with the Seattle brand that has been around since 1913. I'm talking about Stanley, and they invented the category of keeping things hot and cold. Sure, there are a ton of overpriced copycats out there, but no one delivers the quality and, most importantly, the ability to keep things hotter or colder for longer than Stanley. I use the water bottles and pint glasses on a daily basis, and on weekends, their food storage solutions are perfect for all the foods you bring to eat at your local ski area. And while I know this won't last forever, the best deal you're going to find on any Stanley products anywhere comes through my podcast. I'm going to save you 30% off everything Stanley. All you need to do is go to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and when you check out, enter the one-word code DRINKFAST to get that deal. If you spend $75, I'll throw in a limited edition Powell Movement beanie. My final sponsor is Alpine Vans, and guess what? There are no more Alpine Vans for you to buy. While it's a bummer that the best sprinter vans on the planet are no longer available, don't worry. Alpine has huge plans, and next fall, it will be easier than ever to own the adventure mobile of your dreams. While I can't share the details with you yet, I can direct you to the Alpine Vans site, where you can check out Cody Townsend's video, which will show you the functional attention to detail that is put into every inch of an Alpine build. So head on over to alpinevans.com to see what I'm talking about. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast.
Who's the first brand that makes you realize that snowboarding is like a future for you?
So when I started Sonar, that was like what literally kept me sane and was that creative outlet and project that anchored me into so much. And so then I actually dove back into screen printing, right? And that's when I would spend countless hours. Like Pat A and I would just listen to some of the best DJ mixes and whatever else. He was a huge DJ. So we'd listen to DJ mixes. We'd just like jam out. I was sober. I could not drink. I knew if I had alcohol, it would just create depression or really alter like where I needed to be. I just knew where it could lead the thoughts and the energy, you know? But kind of how all that happened was just loving what I was doing. And I felt so lucky to be at Hood. And dude, like to be at Hood any time of the year, but summertime, like snowboarding on a glacier, was just such a fucking privilege, man, you know? And I was coaching kids and hanging out. And it was one of those things that I felt really grateful for, meeting all kinds of other snowboarders, pros, like all kinds of just awesome people out there. Skaters, bikers, you name it. Like Mount Hood in the summers is something that if you get to experience it, and if you've never experienced it, go do it, because it's such an amazing reality of people that all have passion. So when I was out at Hood, I realized that it was very, very privileged to be out there, right? Summer camp is not cheap, but it's a super special opportunity for anyone that gets to experience it, for whether you're coaching, whether you're attending it, whether you're a pro, whether you're AM, whatever you are. If you get to go to Hood and you get access to High Cascade or Wendell's or any of the ski camps, like you're lucky. You think about the population as a whole, and it's very, very, very privileged. So I had this thought, you know what? More kids need to have accessibility to fun and passion and radness. And like, I grew up on the grassroots movement of everything that taught me who I am today, as far as the energy and the charisma, but also like the work ethic and all that. I grew up on grassroots, like just DIY.
You were a tastemaker and a cool kid who had the style and stuff before a lot of people in your area, I feel like.
That's really, incredibly kind, but also like we weren't accepted, right? Which was awesome. That's what made you hungrier, because no one wanted to fit in, dude. No one wanted to be like someone else.
But look at you now. Right? You're the exact same way. Nothing's changed. It's just kind of evolved. Like, look at you now. Mm-hmm. You're 42. You look 33. And you're the fucking cool 33-year-old wearing the Creator Dye shirt, which is whatever. We're not going to go there anymore. So you become this pro snowboarder. You are what, with GNU? Who are your other paying?
So I'm going to go back to the camps, right? Because I started these snowboard camps for kids. I wanted to go back to where I grew up to give back. Not only give back, but also allow kids and people to have an opportunity. I always dreamt of like, all right, what would it have been like to learn from pros? Or what would it have been like to have people like come back and like help give back or whatever. So you know what, let's try this. And so my buddy Eric Doomer and I started this little camp called the Mighty Midwest Snowboard Camp at Afton Alps, and had 15 kids sign up to come.
15 kids pay $500.
No, it was very affordable. So it was like $250 for 2 days of camp or something like that. Yeah. And then we had a bunch of people that supported the camp, right? I remember when I was riding for 32, and 32 sent me like 20 pairs of boots.
Like every kid who went to camp got a boot.
Yeah. And it was like at the time, like Skull Candy. I was riding for Skull Candy too. I've always worn headphones. And I met the Skull Candy dudes. It's crazy how all that happened. I met one of the founders of Skull Candy in the Brighton parking lot when I was wearing Sony headphones with practically a roll of duct tape around my headphones because they had broken a few times, whatever else. But he came up to me and was basically like, what are you doing with all that tape and those Sony headphones on? Like, you love music or what? I was like, man, like, yeah, music is everything to me when I'm snowboarding. And he's like, try these on, and handed me a pair of prototype Skull Crusher headphones. Next thing you know, I was like, what the? Like, these things are amazing. And went up to their office the next day. There's 5 dudes working in an office that's about the same size as your hotel room here that we're sitting in. And met Rick Alden, who was the founder of Skull Candy, Chris Williams, Kevin, who was the graphic designer, Ben, who was handling all like the production and whatever else, logistics, and took headphones back to Colorado with me. And that's what built our friendship for the last like basically 18 years. Rick and I've spent, New Year's with Rick up in Vail, and I give him so much credit because the entrepreneurial spirit and going from different like snowboard brands to magazines to Rick was doing tours when he was younger, right? And I didn't know that until I got to know him. And then when I was doing snowboard camp tours and when I started doing these like grassrooted programs for kids and communities, Rick was like, I'll support you wherever you go. You tell me what you need and I'm there for you. And that dude was like one of the first dudes that I was like, hey, where do you want to go to snowboard this year? You want to go to Japan? All right, if any of your other sponsors chip in, I'll match whatever they do to get you where you need to go. And so at the time, not only was I thankful for that, but it gave me this opportunity to collaborate with that brand and also work with so many other people to have access to like new possibilities and new horizons. And I remember my first ever trip when I was riding for Flux Bindings over to Japan. And basically like when I got on Flux, it was like a flow program and they're like, oh, we'll see how you do and we'll see where this goes and whatnot. And so the relationships that you build is really amazing on a lot of levels. And I think what was happening was that through all the camps I was doing in the Midwest and having this tour that started out as just something that we wanted to do to give back to where we grew up and the local like 350, 400 foot vertical icy slopes of Minnesota, it grew into from one area of Minnesota to 3 areas around the Midwest to 6 areas to 9 ski resorts to 12 to 16 stops. And next thing you know, I was running and able to support a lot of snowboarders. But ultimately what I saw and what was happening was what my dad and I had a hard time with when I first made that switch from traditional sports into the counterculture alternative lifestyle was like acceptance, right? And having a parent or someone that was involved with your life to understand, have a better understanding of why you loved or why you were so interested in doing something. So for me, it was something that I could do to connect parents with their kids, but also allow and educate people to like that it was a big industry out there that you could be a part of. It was just a matter of like how you fit in and where you wanted to go. You didn't have to be a pro. You didn't have to be like the dude. You could contribute and you could be involved. If you love something, it can be something you're going to do for the rest of your life as far as something that made you happy, that could be your lifestyle. And whether you're a filmer, an editor, a graphic designer, a product manager, a developer, an engineer, whatever it is, like there's a bunch of outlets for you to find if you just made it happen.
So if you look at your career and you want to talk about your lifetime times in snowboarding, we can talk about a lot of stuff. You love influencing a lot of kids, but Think Tank, the Jesse Burtner creation of making snowboarding smaller and being creative, because you're always known for being a creative dude, which we've talked about. But like, how did you get involved with those dudes? And was that like the perfect match for you? Because you weren't going to be part of those Mac Dog crazy fucking shit. But like the shit that Jesse was doing was like right in your wheelhouse. Is that kind of how that all worked?
Yeah, I mean, I was filming with a few different productions. Like a few friends and I were filming videos out here.
Like local?
Yeah. And I would go and sell like the VHSs when we had VHSs, and I would go sell the DVDs hand to hand to shops. We produced a few thousand copies and I'd go sell them. I'd go hand to hand sales. Like when I was living in Brack, there were a few people that I was filming with and for, but also, I don't know, man, I was always just like exploring kind of different avenues and doing different things. And so I remember being exposed to Think Tank and meeting Sean Genovese at Mount Hood. And I really admired Jesse Burtner for who he was and also what he was doing with everything he was creating. And it's such like a incredible, like creative, but like that dude just, yeah, he just never settled, right? He never does settle. And so I remember seeing a lot of the stuff that they were doing, like the JB Deuce productions even, you know, with him and
like
Borgstad. Yeah, and all that. And I was like, man, like this Alaska vibe was cool. And then like the Northwest vibe was super cool. And then all like the one-footed stuff. I just thought he had a really cool demeanor and the music choices and the art was always rad. And we ended up meeting and I really thought, yeah, Sean and Jesse were awesome people. And then they basically kind of welcomed me into their crew. That was right around the time like Scott Stevens started filming with Think Tank.
Session with that dude?
Oh, yeah. When we were young, like Scott was going to school, actually. He was going to college at CMC in Leadville. Scott and I met, like, I think we were just hiking the park at Brack, and that's how we met originally. That was even before we were filming for Think Tank.
That guy's like, if you look at all-time snowboarders over a period of time, like maybe one of the most underrated, influential ever. And he's like every skier's favorite snowboarder, but every snowboarder's favorite snowboarder.
Scott's a great, amazing human being.
Everybody just loves his talent as much as he's an amazing human being, which he is.
Oh, his talent. I mean, riding with him was one of my favorite. It was one of my favorite things that I did when we were filming for Think Tank. He came on tours with me around the Midwest. Like, we did all kinds of wild sessions, from the first time I think he ever used a shovel. Like, we were in Michigan and he planted a shovel and kind of cartwheeled with it. And I was like, what? Everyone, it just was blown. Like, the stuff you just felt on these progressive levels, like we were really, all of us were pushing each other so much to just dive like 100% out of that box of what we were expected with, and just like come correct with these like really wild different approaches to what we were doing. Gus Engel, was like another huge influence. I wrote a lot with Gus. I wrote a lot with Ben Bogart. I wrote a lot with, obviously Burtner, Genovese, Chris Larson, rest in peace. And, the whole crew was like, it was even before Videograss, right? Like, Videograss hadn't started yet. Think Tank was like kind of the redheaded stepchild of everything. Everyone was like, what is this, dude? And I remember deciding that I was going to throw, with a couple friends, we were going to throw a world premiere music and snowboard music festival and snowboard screen at Red Rocks called Snowboard on the Rocks in 2010. And no one had thrown like a movie premiere festival with music. And I was like, dude, we got to do this. And I wanted to do something that was just bizarre and just wild, but yet like very monumental in the sense of kind of pushing these like concepts together. And I didn't have a lot of money, but any money I had, I put into that event, and it was super DIY, but somehow we got the ability to rent Red Rocks. It was before before like weed was legalized, and like Red Rocks, there were a lot of shows, but weren't nearly as corporatized as what it is now. We rented it out and like we threw this world premiere snowboard video and music festival and showed the Think Tank video along with a couple other videos to like 6,000 people at Red Rocks. And it was just my belief in exposing people to not only good and original and creative snowboarding, but it is also such a fun opportunity and party. And it was so massive, but also amazing to see. The second year we did it, we had 7,500 people out there watching and supporting snowboarding and music and independent culture and whatnot. And Kevin Jones was like signing autographs with the Standard movie. We had the Standard. We had some of the biggest productions along with Think Tank and Videograss and like these independent productions. It was really fun putting snowboarding and music on these higher levels of this pedestal that people were like, what? Like watching Grenier, like Chris Grenier and all these different icons that came out and were supportive of our event that are still doing what they're doing, whether it's like media or snowboarding, and whatnot. And Salema and Sal was there, and like all these people, from like movie producers to magazines, editorial people to personalities to pros to like all that. So it was fun to put your friends on this like higher stage of playing and whatever else, but also to take those kind of risks. And Think Tank for me is something that I find is like not only a sacred crew, but it taught me to love the Northwest. And also it taught me so much about like work ethic and supporting each other and working super hard in like any situation we were, because we were the underdogs of the snowboard industry. And there's something that speaks loudly about the hunger there.
So Think Tank was the film company that you spent the majority of your career with, and they were very important to you. We've talked about it a bit, but there was something special, it was magical going on with that crew, and what was it?
The people, the brains, the creativity, the inside jokes. I felt so welcomed in. I felt like I had to be on my toes at all times because the level of snowboarding, the level of snowboard history, the respect for each other, the progression was moving at such a fun but yet fast-paced rate. And it was like this underdog like mentality that everyone was so hungry. So we all went out just with that mindset of like rain or shine. You'd go out and film, you'd go out and like find something to do, session for hours with like one-footed tricks or bindingless tricks. It was respectful in the sense of like each other's styles. It was respectful in the sense of like helping each other out, something that we all were building and a part of, and something way bigger than yourself. And so the time with Think Tank, those numerous years of traveling and filming and literally no budget of doing anything what we were trying to do and what we were achieving felt amazing because we were progressing at such a fast and like great rate. But yet the energy amongst like the crew, was all very, very, very real.
Yeah, it seemed like it was all DIY, creative snowboarding that was all passion-based, like you said, no budget. So it seemed like it checked every box that you were all about, and it was all wrapped up in a crew that all had the same mentality, which has to make it super fun.
Absolutely. And it was accessible, right? What I found was it created this canvas every year for snowboarding that really opened up a lot of minds to what you could do if you took the time and you thought a little bit harder about something rather than just having a budget to do it. And it was amazing working with Jeno and Jesse and Pika and just everyone involved in those multiple years of life.
And so while your snowboarding career is going to be remembered for your filming and your video parts, competitions weren't a big driving force within your career, but there was one huge contest, the Honda Sessions in 2006. I don't know if it was a huge contest or not, but you end up sharing a podium with Shaun White and Travis Rice. Was that as insane as it sounds to say right now?
Looking back, I never would have imagined that. And it still seems a little surreal, but it was incredible. I actually really started enjoying contests for a few years of my life, and it was kind of accountability for me to really work towards a goal, but also learn tricks. And the Honda Sessions was a massive contest. It was one of the coolest contests to this day. Instead of like a run format, it was a session format. So they gave out cash every 15 minutes, which was amazing. And so there was a big scoreboard and rider board, and it was, session style. It was just so unique and revolutionary in its own sense, because every 15 minutes you'd be awarded cash, but then whoever did the best over the course of the session would get awarded, top 3 on podium spots. And I will never forget standing on that podium and looking to my right and having Shaun White next to me, and then looking to my left and having Travis Rice stand next to me. And that event was in dedication and also in respect for my homie Josh Millay. And so a lot of what I was writing for wasn't just for myself, it was for Josh, and it was for the local Colorado community. And I am so incredibly grateful for that opportunity to have that moment and also represent Josh on that kind of level, because it was amazing that night to even have a moment with Shaun. After I landed one of the tricks during the session, Shaun actually came up to me and basically shook my hand or high-fived and gave me a hug. He paid me a super nice compliment, behind the scenes, right after I landed that trick. And I got a lift up from the sled to the rider's spot where we're all dropping in. And the last thing I would ever imagine is a compliment from Shaun White during a contest,
Yeah.
And that happened. And so there was a lot of respect for him at that moment of life, but also it was a big honor to serve the legacy of my friend Josh Millay.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a special event all around. And do you have a picture of you 3 on the podium? Is that something that you have as a memorabilia piece from your snowboard career?
I believe my dad or someone printed it and sent it to me. It was on the Transworld website. It's in my archives. I haven't got around to it, and I feel ashamed that I haven't done this, but I have roughly 5 wine boxes full of magazines and publications and newspapers and whatnot that I have either had photos in from editorial to contest clippings. I've been meaning to put together a wall with those pieces and kind of frame some of that stuff. I just haven't gotten around to it.
Well, it sounds like you've got so much going on in your life in terms of art that it's going to take you a while to put all that collection together and frame it all up. And if you think about your snowboard career, you had tons of opportunities to create with brands. So snowboarding was almost part art school for you, I would think. What were the projects that you look back on in snowboarding that were key to your artistic development today?
Shout out to all the brand directors, right? And that's a great way to put it, Mike. From all the creative directors that I've worked with, legends like Trent Bush, to my boy Rob Rees at the Unzipper, to Kevin at Skull Candy, to, oh man, the list just goes on and on and on. It's just been such a privilege to team up and work on collaborative, designs and products and signature model designs and products. Once you start producing and once you start just making more and more and more, it teaches you a ton about aesthetics and style and what you can do and what is possible, but also it feels really cool. And it's a huge honor to have products that people are wearing. So when you're out enjoying runs on the mountain, you'll run into an unexpected pair of Von Zipper goggles that I designed for those guys, or a snowboard that you worked on and had your graphics on, or like an outerwear pattern, that Trent Bush and I worked on together. So it's really fun to see how that opened my mind up, also gave me confidence to create more. And all those little things add up to the bigger picture and the bigger stuff. I guess I just felt like I had a different but yet bigger purpose, in the sense of like where creativity could take the next chapter of my existence and what I could contribute to the world.
Awesome. Well, you've had an influence on snowboard product. You have an influence on snowboard style, but people have had an influence on you. And one person that we need to bring up is Ingemar Backman, because I believe he had a big impact on your snowboard life. And what does that dude mean to you?
Ingemar is amazing. I don't know Ingemar that well. Like, we've only met just a few times, but Ingemar will always be an icon of snowboarding. And his spirit, his creativity, his perspective is just a really beautiful, unique, but also his snowboarding is unbelievable, like style-wise, and what he's done to evolve snowboarding throughout time. So the opportunity to ride for Ingemar and Mike Miyazawa's company, Alliance Snowboards, out of Japan for quite a while was just an honor, and something that came full circle after watching Ingemar boost that double, some say even triple poked method on that quarter pipe back in the mid 90s, that air that like changed the world or shocked the world. And so someone like that is such an iconic like figure of the snowboard culture and history that it's a big honor.
Yeah, when someone influences you when you're a kid and then you get to ride for their company as an adult, I think that's a pretty special thing. And in terms of your life and times, I brought up skating before, but in that sport, that was more fun and you weren't really a pro. And it was just something you did. So when you quit, it was no big deal. But with your pro snowboarding, did that come to a hard stop for you? Was it like sponsors said it's over, or you said it's over, and then you wanted to go focus on the world of art? Or how did that end for you?
Well, it sort of lingered. It was partially being aware of where the momentum was in your life, but also how to best manage your time too. And my career as like just focusing on my snowboarding was slowly decreasing, and a lot of my energy was being placed into the snowboard camps and the tour, and trying to serve a bigger purpose than myself. And so I remember sitting down with Jesse Burtner and him providing me some really great advice too as a friend. I think what Jesse could tell is that I was pulled pretty heavily from two different directions, and you really want to do your best at what you can do, and not only put 50% or like a percentage of your energy into something and just do it like okay. And it kind of became this conscious decision of what you could do, what made the most sense, and where you really wanted to spend, or where you could spend your time. And gratefully I had an opportunity to start spending a lot of my time creating and making art.
So you transitioned out of snowboarding, but you've kind of always got your foot in there, it seems like, because you're doing different things and you're always going to be a snowboarder just at heart, and that's your passion. But when did you get to the point where you're focusing on murals? Because if you look at Denver, I think you've done like 80-something murals there. You've probably done them all over the country and maybe even world, who knows? But when do you start focusing on like huge walls? When does someone give you a blank 30 by 20 wall and they say, paint this?
Around the 2010-ish time. It's pretty wild to think about how many pieces of art that myself, along with different artists, spent a lot of really beautiful moments of creating around Denver, around the world, on a national level, around the world, on a regional level. Yeah, wow, just a lot of creating. And so it's always been a combination of commercial clients reaching out about pieces, and then also like everything from painting like skate ramps to random clothing articles, customizing a ton of like apparel options, to then painting really, really large stuff that came with time and experience.
And when money comes into play, when you're painting a huge mural, how do you even know what to charge? Are you just making up a number, or do you have mentors that can tell you, hey, this is what a 30 by 20 is worth?
Yeah, kind of a combination of the two. A lot of stuff I was doing because I just wanted to paint. It's kind of like when you love something, you do it because you just want to do it. You just want to create, right? Like when I snowboarded, I never thought, I was like, I'm not going to snowboard unless I get paid. It was more like, I just love to snowboard. In that sense, I was doing a lot of stuff for free, and it's kind of paying your dues. I had a couple people help me learn how to price things, but also like in life, man, every situation, every client's different. So I don't think there's ever like a standard rate that you can just operate on. You just do your best to read the situation. And, I never got into art to make money either.
You need it for life.
You need it for life, but also it's really special that you're getting paid to do something you love to do, and also something that one people can feel, and you're being supported for your skills and talents that you've worked really hard to develop too.
Yeah, and with your skills and talents, you have a distinct, colorful, kind of geometric style, and it seems like sunsets are in all of your work. And is that calculated, or does that just happen?
Well, I like to paint really bold. I like to paint with a lot of color. When I'm creating in my imagination, a lot is futuristic. Like, how do I look at like a mountain, and instead of looking at it as like a realistic piece of our landscape, I always like to look what that is like futuristically. So almost like taking architectural inspiration and mashing it with landscape and organic landscape, and thinking of something kind of imaginative. So a lot of hard lines, a lot of abstract. As far as like answering that sunset portion of the composition, the time of the golden hour during the sunsets has always been my favorite light hour of the day. All those different moments of sessions on the mountain, on the streets, even while I'm painting buildings, and that golden hour of light, whether you're hiking a trail on your own with your dog or with friends, the light's just really, really pretty. Those moments, the sunset is something that is such a special hour of our day to not only celebrate our existence, but to give thanks and to be grateful. I like to include the sunset, like a little slice of sunset, in almost every one of the pieces I paint. It's something that it always gives the piece a pretty cool like feeling too. Color's a really beautiful thing.
I totally agree with you. And when you think of the colors and all the different pieces that you've done, and I mean, there's so many, but is there one project that sticks out, like your personal favorite?
Last summer was a really special moment of painting. We organized an event and are still organizing this event called We Create. And it's a collaborative public art festival in a super small city right next to Monterey, California, called Sand City, that their city manager, Aaron Blair, asked and invited us to help organize there. It's a really great artist community there, but they didn't have much as far as public art and murals and whatnot. Last year, we had 31 artists painting walls there. I had worked with one of the most like Central Coast and graphic artists, him and his father. There in the world, the Phillips family. So it was Jim Phillips' son, Jimbo Phillips.
Legendary dude.
Rad legendary dude. And Jimbo traditionally doesn't paint a lot of murals. Like a lot of his stuff's on posters and products and smaller scale. But I reached out to Jimbo through an old friend, Joel Gomez from Sessions Clothing, outerwear. And those two I knew each other really well from Santa Cruz. And Joel was super nice to connect me with Jimbo. And I had spoken to Jimbo, and then we had met up and had a beer and talked about the whole idea and the concept, whatever. I don't know, a week or so later, we were speaking, and he's like, I'm in. And it aligned with his schedule. And so I really ultimately wanted to pay homage to Jimbo in that area, because there hadn't been a lot of Phillips art on exteriors of buildings. And there was an artist that we were working with from Netherlands who was supposed to paint with Jimbo, and he was unable to get into the country at that time with all the different travel restrictions. And so instead of leaving Jimbo dry, I called him and said, hey, like, here's kind of the situation. What do you want to do? I don't want to bail on you, but like, do you have someone else you'd want to bring into the mix to collaborate with? And he was just like, well, why don't we paint together?
That's so cool.
And it was one of those invitations from someone like Jimbo that not only felt like a huge honor, but I wanted to treat that situation with 111% respect, and dive in on another level. So he hadn't done a lot of work with aerosol. So I was helping him learn how to like control an aerosol can and like just giving him little tips and stuff like that. And then his skill and talent is so incredible. So it was so fun working all the brush work with him after we had painted aerosol, watching him, like a little kid still on that wall. But we had a lot of great life conversations, and that was a really special time. I would say that's probably one of my favorite pieces. I painted a bus that I still have with Jamie Lynn.
Oh, that's sick.
Which was super special. And that was awesome, having Jamie bless this bus and allow me to paint on the bus. And, it's pretty fun when I'm driving my bus around town. The amount of people that are snowboarders or that recognize Jamie's style, and also kind of take a piece of Jamie's art and, you know, have that out here in the Rockies or wherever we're going with it has been pretty rad too. But there's been a lot of moments I never really would imagine that, you know, I'd be painting both like a ton locally and a lot globally, but it's happened and it continues to happen. So I'm just extremely thankful for anyone that continues to show me support and feel the energy that I really try to put out through my art.
Now it's time for something that I call Inappropriate Questions. I get someone you know to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. This week, I was able to get one of your favorite Northwest people, Jesse Burtner, to come up with the questions. Here we go. We're going to jump into question number 1.
What up, Milbs? Throwing it back to some think tank days. For Stack Footy, we had a huge crew in Alaska, 2 huge. Actually, we broke it into 2 different crews to go and build jumps. And Scott and I were kind of heading up the fun crew, building sort of medium-sized jumps. And then there was Andre Spinelli and Genovese, and we called them the extra block layer crew because they would throw like an extra 3 or 4 layers on the jump and just make these ridiculously poppy things. And you got thrown in with that crew. And I always wondered if there was any regrets getting thrown in and lumped in with those extra blockers, if you'd wish you'd been with the fun crew, me and Scott.
Man, that trip was so much fun. It was a rowdy crew. There's a lot of experience, and we worked really hard. I remember passing out that first night after building for 10 hours straight, and that jump was bigger. It was a bigger wedge, extra blocked than I've ever built, and I was so excited to hit that jump the next day. But man, you guys, yeah, you had the fun crew. It was my first time to Alaska, so for me, I was down for whatever was served to me, and I was so thankful and grateful to be there. And Spinelli and Geno and Larson and myself, and I think there were like 1 or 2 other people in our crew, and my boy Mac, who was filming. That session was all time, and I'd never had gone as big as I've gone off of a jump. I never had experienced it was so beautiful out there on Thompson Pass, and I had to put the big boy pants on and really be focused and really concentrate and really put some effort into my legs and run-ins, because like I remember it was like the shakiest my legs have ever felt going into a jump, and then probably the most airtime that I've ever had in the backcountry. But it taught me a lot, and I landed some stuff that I was super proud of, but also will never forget those times because a lot of character was built, and just so many fun times filming for Stack Footy and AK.
Next up, question number 2.
So this is sort of a question about multitasking, and I don't know if you've already talked about this at this point in your podcast experience here with Mike, but you've always been this crazy multitasker, kind of throwing it back to the Sonar Mighty Midwest tour days, especially the right brain, left brain year and Ransack year. You were just doing so many things, combining your hustling spirit with snowboarding, filming, community building, everything. And at that time, it was like insane how much you were on the phone and trying to do a million things at once. And it was like Milbery time was like this other universe that we would enter, and we would have no idea when we were going to leave or what was going to happen. So I'm wondering where you're at with multitasking these days. Seems like you focused it a bit, and yeah, what's going on with the multitasking world of Pat Milbery, and what's later in the day, Geno hour or Milbery hour?
Ooh, well, let's see. Jesse, you taught me a lot about the priorities of not multitasking and focusing on less, which the more I started understanding and studying and trying to comprehend, I realized the value in trying not to multitask as much, which helped clear up so much in the mind, but also the focus and let your brain be happier. I guess you could say I've reduced my multitasking. I'm still snowboarding a ton, which keeps me happy and fueled and motivated and stoked. But it's so hard. Like I'm constantly thinking about creating and designing and drawing and illustrating and painting. So it's hard to turn that switch off, but I try to do my best. I'm painting pretty much every day. I'm not painting. I'm either snowboarding or like studying and trying to relax. But meditations helped me a lot with resetting and recharging and being able to ground myself a bit. And I'm still learning. I still feel like I'm a student with trying to figure out the whole meditation thing and taking a break for yourself. But as far as multitasking goes, like with my art, I have really been very grateful and have a lot of good people I work around and work with who do an amazing job and have had my back and partnered and collaborated on a lot of different stuff. So that's helped shift the weight a little bit and lighten the load and allow all of us more opportunities. But there's also been this curation element that's come into helping and serving more artists and providing some more opportunities. So like the multitasking thing has come back more full circle a little bit. I oftentimes find myself drinking too much coffee and just getting in the zone and listening to a ton of podcasts and books on tape or amazing DJ mixes and whatnot. And so I don't even realize that I've been painting for 12 to 14 hours. And then I was like, oh man, like I got to stop. So it's a combination of Jeno and Milbery hour, I guess, is the best way to answer that question.
And now we'll go to Jesse's final inappropriate question.
This one's pretty short. I just want to know if you peed on any media moguls' couches lately.
It was definitely one of the most embarrassing moments. When I was up in Washington, Jesse and I and a bunch of us were at Mount Baker for the bank slalom, and not partaking in the bank slalom, but up there enjoying ourselves and being entertained. And we went and had a really fun time. And I don't know how I ended up staying and being invited to stay at the Galbraith's house up there. And if anyone knows what Frequency magazine, the Frequency Snowboarders Journal is, it's one of the best and raddest publications there is and was and whatnot. And I woke up on Jeff's and Jess's couch and I was soaking wet and I had no idea what happened. And I had never done that in my entire life, but I was so embarrassed. And I had never met them until the night before and knew of them and respected the shit out of them. And I didn't know why I was even at their house. And I didn't know what to do, but I just was super embarrassed. And, that has not happened since. But I guess it made an impact and a splash. Thank you for reminding me of those humble moments of losing track of what happens to you when you're enjoying a bunch of legendary dudes and people and moments up in Washington at Mount Baker during the bank slalom, because that's one of the best events and also the raddest gatherings of human beings that any snowboarder could ever attend.
So that was Inappropriate Questions. And Pat, man, it's nice to finally have this conversation. You were one of the first people I was going to interview years back, and I don't know what happened, but I know the disconnect was all on my end. And then, to add insult to injury, we finally make this thing happen, and I proverbially shit the bed by being an absolute train wreck during the interview. I am so sorry about that. But now, after doing the interview, I realize why people have all those nice things to say about you, because more important than your athletic ability, more important than your art, you are genuinely a nice, kind human being. And on top of that, you're super talented. So it's the total package, and I want to thank you for your time.
Yeah, this has been a really wild experience, and thank you, Mike, for all what you do with your podcast, with the podcast, and the courage and the opportunity to allow us to talk about life together and share memories and also philosophies and whatnot. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for everyone that has been a part of the journey and my existence. I appreciate you respecting Milbery time. I appreciate you inspiring me on so many different levels, from the musicians to the snowboarders to the skaters to the bladers to all the beautiful women and the angels of my life these days, to my dog Tora, to the blue skies, the sunsets, and all the different people that have supported my art and creativity. I can't thank you enough for letting me add to the world and trying my best to not only be a positive role model, but also have fun, wear my smile like my mom always encouraged us to do, and be respectful of what we have and be grateful for this beautiful earth that we get to be a part of. Thanks to punk rock. Thanks to hip hop.
So that was time with Pat Milbery, and what a nice, kind, considerate, and deep dude who was way more of a talker than I anticipated. And that was great, as while I can direct a podcast with the best of them, I was in a state where I needed a talker for obvious reasons. And Pat doesn't just talk, he's a doer as well. And between his snowboard career, his art, his camps, his product design, Pat has always been doing. The one thing that doesn't really seem to matter to Pat is the whole money part. He's all passion-based, and while I'm sure he gets a pretty penny for his talents, and I tried to find out what that looked like, Pat didn't come forward with that information, and that's okay. I know, it's kind of rude for me to ask, but whatever, I do it all the time. So Pat, thanks for doing the podcast, and sorry about my condition. That's the show for this week. At this point, I want to ask you to subscribe and review me wherever you listen, and please support my amazing sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Stanley, Alpine Vans, Elon Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.